A single mother stands at the checkout, humiliated as a ruthless store manager forces her into a debt trap just to feed her kids. Customers look away, until one man steps forward. Keanu Reeves. But what starts as a simple act of kindness quickly unravels a dark, corrupt scheme, and Keanu is ready to bring it all crashing down. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The fluorescent lights of Easy Save Grocery buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the worn tile floors and half-stocked shelves. The store smelled faintly of overripe produce and stale bread, but for the residents of this struggling neighborhood, it was one of the few options they had. At the checkout, Sarah Morgan stood anxiously, gripping the handle of her shopping cart, as her two children, Mia, 8, and Tommy, 5, huddled close to her side. Her face was tired, dark circles under her eyes, strands of her brown hair falling loose from a rushed ponytail. She was doing the math in her head, as she always did. Every cent counted. "All right," she said, pulling a small stack of discount coupons from her purse and handing them to the cashier, a young man who looked barely out of high school. "These should cover most of it." The cashier barely glanced at the coupons before scanning them. Then, with a loud beep, the register rejected them. He frowned. "Yeah, no," he said dismissively, shaking his head. "These are expired." Sarah's stomach twisted. She knew they weren't. "There must be a mistake," she said quickly, her voice soft but firm. "They're valid through the end of the month." The cashier sighed loudly, clearly uninterested in helping. He held up a coupon and waved it mockingly. "Says here it expired yesterday." A murmur rippled through the line behind her. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Sarah swallowed hard. Mia squeezed her hand. Tommy hid behind her leg. She glanced at the total on the screen. She was already cutting it close. Without those coupons, she wouldn't be able to afford everything. "I can put something back," she said, reaching toward the cart. That's when a new voice cut through the noise. "No need for that." The store manager, Mr. Porter, approached with a calculated, almost rehearsed expression of concern. A man in his late 50s, Porter had slicked back silver hair, a tailored suit that felt too polished for a grocery store, and a practiced smile that didn't reach his cold, assessing eyes. "Ms. Morgan," he said smoothly, "I understand times are tough." Sarah stiffened. She had never given this man her name. "Now," Porter continued, folding his hands in front of him, "I'd hate to see you struggling like this. You know, we have a program just for hard-working moms like you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew exactly what he meant. The Easy Pay plan. The store's so-called payment program wasn't about helping people. It was a trap, a loan scheme disguised as convenience, forcing desperate families into high-interest debts over basic groceries. Sarah had avoided it as long as she could. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, forcing a smile. "But I'll just put a few things back." Porter chuckled, shaking his head, louder this time, for everyone to hear. "No need to be embarrassed," he said. "We take care of our own. Just sign up today and you can take everything home. No stress." More customers turned to watch. Some looked down, pretending not to see. Mia's small voice broke the silence. "Mommy?" Sarah's hands trembled on the cart handle. She felt trapped, humiliated. And then, a new presence stepped forward. A man who had been standing quietly behind Sarah the entire time. Keanu Reeves. Dressed in a simple dark jacket and jeans, hair slightly disheveled, Keanu had been watching everything unfold. His expression calm but unreadable, like he had seen this kind of abuse before. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and slid a black credit card onto the counter. "I'll cover it," he said smoothly. Silence. The cashier froze. Porter's smile twitched. Sarah whipped around, startled. "You don't have to—" "I know," Keanu said, his voice low, steady. The register beeped, confirming the transaction. The groceries were paid for. But Keanu wasn't looking at Sarah anymore. He was staring straight at Porter. For the first time, the store manager shifted uncomfortably, his polished act cracking ever so slightly. "Well," Porter said, trying to recover, "that's very generous of you, sir." Keanu tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. "No need to be embarrassed," Keanu echoed, his voice deliberately calm. "We take care of our own, right?" Porter's jaw tightened. For the first time, customers around the store began whispering. Keanu handed the bagged groceries to Sarah, his touch gentle but firm. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, gripping the bags like a lifeline. Keanu nodded but didn't say anything. As Sarah turned to leave with Mia and Tommy clutching her hands, Keanu lingered for a moment. He glanced at other customers, many of whom looked away, nervous. Something was wrong here. Something bigger than just one woman being pressured at checkout. As he walked toward the exit, he heard low voices, a pair of elderly shoppers murmuring about hidden fees and extra charges. And that's when he knew. This wasn't just a bad manager. This was a scam. And he wasn't done yet. Sarah Morgan carried the last bag of groceries to her car, still shaken from the humiliating ordeal at Easy Save Grocery. The sting of embarrassment lingered, but more than that, fear. She had seen Porter's face change the moment Keanu stepped in. His fake charm cracked, and for a second, there was something else. Something dangerous. She set the bags down and exhaled sharply, trying to compose herself. "Need a hand?" Sarah turned. Keanu Reeves stood beside her, carrying the last bag. "Oh, thank you," she said, clearing her throat. Keanu placed the bag in the trunk and shut it gently. He didn't move right away, didn't rush off like most people would. Instead, he studied her with calm patience, as if waiting for her to say something. Sarah hesitated, then finally spoke. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did back there." "No thanks needed," Keanu said. "But I do have a question." She frowned. "What?" Keanu glanced back at the grocery store. "What exactly is going on in there?" Sarah's breath hitched. She looked down at her hands, as if debating whether or not to say anything. "Sarah," Keanu said softly, "something isn't right." She let out a tired sigh. "It's not just me, it's everyone. Porter runs that store like a loan shark. People walk in thinking they're just getting groceries, but if they can't pay, he pressures them into easy pay." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "The payment plan he mentioned?" Sarah nodded grimly. "He acts like it's a favor, but once you sign, you're trapped. The interest rates are insane. People end up owing twice, sometimes 3 times what they borrowed. If they can't pay, Porter threatens them. He tells them they'll be banned from buying food, or worse." Keanu's jaw tensed. This was bigger than just humiliating customers at checkout. "How does he enforce it?" Keanu asked. Sarah hesitated before answering. "He has people, cashiers who enforce the payments, a few guys who collect from those who fall behind. I don't know how far it goes, but I know some folks have lost everything because of him." Keanu didn't say anything right away. He let the silence settle, watching Sarah carefully. He could tell she was scared to be talking about this. "Sarah," he said gently, "who else do you know that's been hurt by this?" She bit her lip, hesitating again, then glanced toward the other side of the parking lot. "Mrs. Henderson?" Keanu followed Sarah's gaze to where Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with neatly curled gray hair, was slowly loading groceries into an old station wagon. Sarah and Keanu approached cautiously. The older woman's face was lined with worry, and her frail hands trembled as she reached for a heavy bag. "Let me get that for you," Keanu offered, lifting the bag effortlessly into the car. Mrs. Henderson looked up, startled. "Oh, thank you, dear. That's kind of you." Sarah gave her a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Keanu. He helped me inside." The woman's smile faded. She looked at Sarah knowingly. She understood what that meant. "You were short, weren't you?" she asked, voice soft. Sarah nodded. Mrs. Henderson's eyes darted toward the store, then back to Keanu. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "I owe them 4 times what I borrowed," she said shakily. "It started as a small loan, just enough to buy groceries for the week. But then they added late fees, extra charges, and suddenly, I was buried. Keanu frowned. Did they ever threaten you? Mrs. Henderson swallowed hard. Porter sent 2 men to my house last week. They banged on my door, told me I had 1 week to pay or they'd take something of equal value. Sarah's face paled. You never told me that. Mrs. Henderson blinked rapidly as if trying to hold back tears. What could you do, dear? No one stands up to him. No one ever has. Keanu felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just about overcharging customers. This was organized crime. Keanu glanced back at the store, watching as people walked in, completely unaware of the trap waiting for them inside. He pulled out his phone and started checking the grocery receipts. Something didn't add up. These numbers are wrong, he muttered. Sarah peered over. What do you mean? Keanu pointed at the subtotal. The prices on the shelf don't match what's on the receipt. Sarah's eyes widened. They overcharge? Keanu nodded. They mark down prices on the shelves to look fair, but at the register, they charge more. Customers don't notice unless they check their receipts carefully, and by then, it's too late. Mrs. Henderson's hands trembled. People trust them. Keanu exhaled sharply. And they're using that trust to bleed people dry. Sarah folded her arms. So what do we do? Keanu didn't hesitate. We stop them. Keanu stepped away, pulling out his phone and dialing a number. Detective Marcus Cole? The line rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Cole. Marcus, Keanu said. I need you to look into something for me. The detective sighed. Every time you say that, I end up filing a mountain of paperwork. This time it's worth it, Keanu replied. I'm looking at a grocery store running a full-scale predatory loan operation, hidden fees, and possible fraud. There was a beat of silence. Then, where? Easy Save Grocery, Fremont, Keanu said. Marcus grunted. That place? I've heard complaints, but nothing solid. Keanu's gaze darkened. I've got eyewitnesses, victims, and proof. This is bigger than just a shady business. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then sighed. All right, I'll dig. But if we do this, we do it right. No kicking down doors unless we have everything we need. Keanu smirked. Would I ever do that? Marcus snorted. Yeah, constantly. Keanu chuckled, then ended the call. He turned back to Sarah. We're going to expose Porter, and we're going to do it the right way. But before she could respond, Sarah's phone rang. She answered hesitantly. Hello. A low, familiar voice came through the line. Porter. I'd be careful about who you talk to, he said, his tone calm but laced with warning. Wouldn't want your little ones to suffer for your mistakes. Sarah's blood ran cold. Keanu saw her face pale and grabbed the phone gently, pressing it to his ear. He didn't say anything at first. He let the silence stretch. Then, in a voice as calm as steel, he said, You just made a big mistake. Click. Porter hung up. Sarah looked up at Keanu, terrified. What do we do now? She whispered. Keanu pocketed the phone, his jaw set, his eyes darkened. We take him down? The next morning, Keanu Reeves sat in a dimly lit diner, stirring a cup of black coffee as he waited. The old-fashioned neon sign outside flickered, casting a soft glow on the cracked leather booths. It was a quiet spot, the kind of place where people talked in hushed tones and no one asked questions. A perfect location for what was about to happen. Across from him, Detective Marcus Cole leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching Keanu with an unreadable expression. Marcus was a seasoned cop, the kind who'd seen it all and didn't trust easily. But he knew Keanu well enough to understand that when he called, it meant trouble for the bad guys. You're really going after this, huh? Marcus finally said. Keanu nodded. Porter isn't just running a shady grocery store. He's preying on desperate people. He's forcing them into debt, overcharging, selling expired food, and threatening them when they can't pay. We have evidence. We just need more. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I looked into Easy Save last night. There's been dozens of complaints over the years, price hikes, fraud, even threats. But no one's ever made it stick. Either witnesses back out or the case gets buried. Keanu's jaw tightened. That's going to change. Marcus smirked. I figured you'd say that. That's why I brought backup. Just then, a woman stepped up to their booth, holding a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other. Emma Lan. She slid into the seat next to Marcus, setting down her coffee without a word. Dressed in a fitted blazer and dark jeans, Emma was a hard-hitting journalist, known for exposing corporate corruption. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I pulled records on Easy Save. She placed her tablet on the table and swiped through files. It's worse than we thought. Keanu and Marcus leaned in as Emma pulled up documents. Over 40 official complaints filed with consumer protection agencies, none investigated. Multiple lawsuits settled quietly. Victims got hush money or were too afraid to fight. Internal memos leaked from past employees showing Easy Save had a quota system. Cashiers got bonuses for signing people up for Easy Pay. Emma tapped the screen, eyes flashing. This isn't just a store running scams. This is an organized crime operation disguised as a business. Keanu exhaled slowly. Then we bring it down. Marcus arched an eyebrow. Keanu's voice was calm but firm. We get Porter on tape. That afternoon, Keanu and Sarah returned to Easy Save, this time with a plan. Sarah carried a hidden recorder tucked inside her purse. Keanu had a small pin camera clipped to his jacket. Their goal? Get Porter to admit to the scam. Sarah walked straight to the customer service desk. Porter stood behind the counter wearing his usual smug expression. Well, Miss Morgan, he said, spreading his hands. I see you've come to your senses. Ready to sign up for Easy Pay? Sarah took a deep breath, playing along. I've been thinking about it, she said hesitantly. Porter smiled. Hooked. Smart decision, he said smoothly. It's simple. Just sign here and you can take whatever you need. Of course, there's a small interest rate. How much? Sarah asked. Porter chuckled. Oh, just 30% per month. Sarah's stomach churned, but she kept her voice even. That seems high. Porter's smile faltered for just a second. That's the deal, sweetheart. You don't want to go home empty-handed, do you? Keanu stepped forward then, resting his hands on the counter. That interest rate is illegal. Porter's eyes flicked to Keanu, his expression shifting from fake charm to thinly veiled hostility. Mind your own business, Porter said. Keanu tilted his head slightly, voice calm. This is my business. Porter leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You don't know who you're messing with. Keanu smiled faintly. Neither do you. Sarah pulled back just enough for the recorder to catch every word. Porter smirked. Listen, buddy, I run this store. People need me. They can't go anywhere else. He leaned in further. And if they can't pay, I make sure they learn their lesson. Keanu held his gaze, his expression unreadable, but inside he knew they had him. With the recording secured, Keanu and Sarah moved on to their second objective, exposing the expired food scam. Keanu casually browsed the aisles, pulling several items off the shelves. Milk, 3 weeks past its expiration date. Baby formula, expired 2 months ago. Meat, discolored and rewrapped. Keanu placed the items in his basket. As he reached for another, a store employee approached. Can I help you, sir? The young man asked nervously. Keanu looked at his name tag. Mike. Keanu held up the milk. This is expired. Mike swallowed hard. We're told to leave those on the shelves until they sell. Keanu studied him. You don't like this job, do you? Mike glanced around, lowering his voice. I have no choice. Porter pays cashiers bonuses to push Easy Pay loans. If we don't hit numbers, we get fired. Keanu's eyes darkened. You want out? Mike nodded quickly. Keanu slipped him a card with Emma Lan's number. Call her. Tell her everything. Mike snatched the card and disappeared into the back. But then, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Keanu turned to see 2 large men in dark jackets moving toward him. Porter's enforcers. Keanu sighed. He knew this was coming. One of the thugs grabbed his shoulder. "You've been asking too many questions." Keanu moved like lightning. He twisted free, driving his elbow into the thug's ribs, making him stumble. The second attacker swung. Keanu ducked, countering with a brutal uppercut. The first man lunged again. Keanu grabbed him, spun him, and slammed him into a shelf. Cans crashed to the floor. The second man threw a wild punch. Keanu dodged, swept his legs out from under him, and sent him sprawling. Both men groaned on the floor as Porter stormed out of his office. What the hell is going on? Keanu adjusted his jacket, completely calm. "I was just shopping," he said, "but your guys got a little aggressive." Porter's face turned red with fury. Keanu stepped closer. Too close. "Maybe you should worry less about me," Keanu said, lowering his voice, "and more about what happens when this footage goes public." Porter's eyes flicked toward the security cameras. He suddenly looked nervous. Keanu smirked. He had him. That night, Keanu met with Marcus and Emma. They now had a full confession from Porter. Video proof of the expired food scam. A witness, Mike, willing to testify. Security footage of Keanu's attack. Evidence of Porter using violence to protect his scam. Marcus leaned back. "This is enough." Emma nodded. "We take him down publicly, no escape, no cover-up." Keanu sipped his coffee, watching the city lights outside. "Tomorrow," he said, "we end this." Easy Save grocery was packed. Families filled the aisles, carts rattled over the worn tile floors, and the rhythmic beep of registers echoed through the store. It was the busiest time of day, exactly what Keanu Reeves, Detective Marcus Cole, and journalist Emma Lan had been waiting for. Sarah Morgan stood near the entrance, her heart pounding. She spotted Mrs. Henderson, who clutched an envelope in her frail hands, her lips pressed into a determined line. Keanu had told her this was her moment, the moment they exposed Porter in front of everyone. Hidden cameras were rolling. Emma's team had placed them strategically throughout the store. A live stream was already broadcasting to thousands of viewers. Now it was time. Keanu stepped forward, walking straight to the registers. Porter stood behind the counter, overseeing the checkout lanes. He was smug as always, calculating. He leaned on the counter, barking orders to the cashiers, watching customers carefully, as if measuring who might be a good target for his predatory loan scheme. But the moment he saw Keanu approaching, his expression flickered. Keanu stopped directly in front of the registers, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We need to talk." A few nearby customers turned, sensing something unusual. Porter forced a laugh. "If it isn't Mr. Charity, back to pay for more groceries?" Keanu didn't smile. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Then he pressed play. Porter's own voice filled the store. "People need me. They can't go anywhere else. If they can't pay, I make sure they learn their lesson." The words rippled through the grocery store. Cashiers froze. Customers stopped pushing their carts. A mother gripped her child's hand, her face twisting in anger. Porter's face paled. He held up his hands. This is taken out of context." Keanu raised an eyebrow. He turned the volume up. "We take care of our own, right?" A murmur spread through the store. People recognized Porter's voice. They recognized the scam. Porter laughed nervously, looking around. His employees were watching. His customers were listening. "Come on," he scoffed. "This is ridiculous." Keanu calmly reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of papers. "This is a collection of receipts." He raised them high. "Prices on the shelf don't match what's on these. You've been overcharging your customers for years." Gasps. Customers looked at their own receipts in sudden realization. Keanu dropped the next stack of papers onto the counter. "This is proof that Easy Pay isn't a convenient loan. It's an illegal, predatory scam." Porter's smirk vanished. And then, a soft, trembling voice cut through the silence. "Almost took my home." The crowd parted, and Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, clutching an envelope in both hands. Her voice wavered. but she didn't back down. She lifted the envelope, letting everyone see the bold red words stamped across the front. Eviction notice. Porter gave me a loan, she said, voice shaking. I borrowed $100 for food. He told me I could pay it off in small amounts. But the fees, the interest, her eyes filled with tears. I now owe over $1,500. And now, I'm losing my home. Customers gasped. Anger spread like wildfire. A father near the dairy section cursed under his breath. A young mother clutched her purse, realization dawning on her face. The crowd was turning. And then, the doors burst open. Detective Marcus Cole entered first, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Behind him, two uniformed officers moved swiftly, hands near their belts. Porter's eyes widened in pure panic. "What's going on?" he barked, stepping back. Marcus pulled out a warrant. "Mr. Porter, you are under arrest for fraud, illegal lending practices, and consumer exploitation." Porter stammered, looking around. This is a mistake." "No. The mistake was thinking you wouldn't get caught." Keanu's voice was low and cold. Emma Lan lifted her phone higher. "We're live, Porter. The whole city is watching." Porter's eyes darted to the camera. His own crimes were being broadcast in real time. The color drained from his face. Marcus nodded to his officers. "Cuff him." Porter tried to bolt. He turned toward the back exit, shoving past the employees. But Keanu was faster. With effortless precision, Keanu sidestepped, grabbed Porter's arm, and spun him around. Porter landed face first against the counter. The officers moved in, slapping handcuffs around his wrists. Customers cheered. Employees quit on the spot. One cashier ripped off his name tag and threw it at the ground. Sarah stood frozen, holding her kids, as relief washed over her. It was over. Porter was dragged out of the store, his furious shouts fading into the distance. Emma turned the camera back toward Keanu, Marcus, and Sarah. Marcus crossed his arms. "We've been trying to nail Porter for years." He glanced at Keanu. "Guess we just needed the right guy." Emma grinned, checking her phone. "You're already trending." She showed the screen. Porter exposed. Justice for the community. Keanu fights back. Keanu just shook his head. "This isn't about me. It's about the people he hurt." Sarah stepped forward, wiping tears from her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. Keanu looked at her, then at Mia and Tommy, who clung to their mother's side. He knelt down, eye level with the kids. "You know what's better than someone saving you?" he asked, gently. The kids shook their heads. Keanu smiled. "Knowing you saved yourself." Sarah let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." Keanu stopped her with a kind look. "You stood up. You fought back. I just made sure people listened." In the weeks that followed, Easy Save was permanently shut down. Porter's network unraveled, revealing deeper corruption within the company. Lawsuits poured in, and more victims came forward. But the best part? The community came together. Local farmers and vendors took over the empty building, turning it into a community-run farmers market. Fresh food, fair prices, and no more corruption. On opening day, Keanu stood at the back of the crowd, watching as Sarah and Mrs. Henderson helped organize the event. Mia and Tommy ran up to him, grinning. "Mr. Reeves, are you staying?" Keanu smiled, kneeling to their level. "Not this time, buddy." Tommy pouted. "But why?" Keanu ruffled his hair. "Because you don't need me anymore." Sarah met his gaze from across the market. "Thank you," she mouthed. Keanu nodded. Then, quietly, he walked away. Another town changed. Another life rebuilt. And just like that, he was gone. The fall of Easy Save Grocery sent ripples throughout the city. What had started as a single moment of kindness at a checkout line had unraveled an entire criminal scheme, exposing Mr. Porter's illegal empire for what it truly was: predatory lending, price manipulation, and systematic fraud. With the public takedown captured on live broadcast, There was no escaping the consequences. Porter was officially charged with multiple counts of fraud, illegal loan practices, consumer exploitation, threatening customers and employees. His easy pay scheme was dismantled and detectives uncovered hidden ledgers showing years of theft and illegal debt collection tactics. The evidence was so overwhelming that the case didn't even make it to trial. Porter pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, but even that meant years behind bars. For the first time in a long time, the people of this community could breathe. But there was a new problem. Easy Save had been one of the only grocery stores in the neighborhood. With it shut down, the community now had nowhere affordable to buy food. And that's where Keanu stepped in again. The morning after Easy Save officially closed its doors for good, Keanu met with Sarah, Mrs. Henderson, and several other local residents in the vacant parking lot. The sign that once bore Easy Save's name had already been ripped down, leaving an empty frame swaying in the wind. "We need a solution," Sarah said, arms crossed. "People still need food. We can't just leave a hole where this store used to be." Keanu nodded. "I have an idea." Everyone turned to him. "What if," Keanu said, scanning the open space, "we take the power back? What if we run this ourselves?" Mrs. Henderson furrowed her brow. "You mean open a new store?" "Not a store," Keanu said. "A farmer's market." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's actually brilliant," Keanu continued. "I've already spoken with several local farmers and vendors. They're willing to partner with us, bringing in fresh food directly to the people. No middlemen, no corruption." Murmurs of excitement rippled through the group. "And we run it together," Keanu added. "No CEO, no one person controlling everything, just a fair system where everyone benefits." The idea sparked something in the community. People who had been victims of Porter's scam now had the chance to build something better, something honest. They got to work immediately. A month later, the once abandoned lot had been transformed. Tents and stands were lined up neatly, filled with fresh produce, dairy, meat, and homemade goods. Local farmers shook hands with customers, and the sounds of laughter, conversation, and children running freely filled the air. The community had done this together. Keanu walked through the market, watching the energy around him. Vendors smiled. Families shopped without fear of being overcharged or scammed. And at one stand, Keanu spotted Sarah Morgan, now wearing a fresh uniform with a name tag. But this time, it wasn't a grocery store badge. She was working at a childcare center booth, signing up local parents for affordable daycare services. Sarah had a new job, a stable one, a future. She spotted Keanu and grinned. "Look at this," she said, gesturing around her. "This is real. This is ours." Keanu smiled back. "Told you. You saved yourself." Just then, Mia and Tommy ran up, holding apples. "Mr. Reeves," Tommy beamed. "Look, we got these for free 'cause it's opening day." Keanu knelt down. "That's a good deal, buddy." Mia looked up at him shyly. "Are you staying?" Keanu glanced around. The market was thriving. The community had taken back control of their food, their resources, their dignity. They didn't need him anymore. He ruffled Mia's hair. "I'll always be around," he said with a smile. "But this is yours now." With Porter behind bars, authorities uncovered more victims who had suffered under his easy pay scam. A compensation fund was set up to return stolen money to families who had lost their savings to Porter's predatory loans. One of the first recipients? Mrs. Henderson? Keanu sat beside her on her small porch as she held the check in her trembling hands. I never thought I'd see justice," she whispered. Keanu chuckled. It took a little push. She patted his hand. "You remind me of my late husband, always looking out for others." Keanu smiled softly. "He must have been a good man." She nodded. "The best." They sat in companionable silence, watching the street as children ran by, laughing freely. For the first time in years, this neighborhood felt alive again. As weeks turned to months, the farmers' market grew. More vendors signed up, more families shopped, and soon, other communities took notice. Sarah and a few others helped train new vendors, ensuring that no one else would ever fall victim to a scam like Porter's again. Marcus, now promoted to captain, kept a watchful eye on local businesses, making sure no one ever abused the people of this city again. Emma's expose on Easy Save went viral, becoming a national story. And Keanu? He had done what he came to do. One evening, Keanu stood at the edge of the farmer's market, watching as families gathered under string lights, their voices a hum of laughter and warmth. Sarah walked up beside him. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Keanu nodded. She smiled knowingly. "You don't stick around long, do you?" Keanu shrugged. "I go where I'm needed." Sarah extended a hand. "Well, just know that you changed everything for us." Keanu shook her hand firmly. "No, you did." As he turned to go, Mia and Tommy ran toward him one last time. "Mr. Reeves," Tommy shouted. "Can I be like you when I grow up?" Keanu knelt down, meeting the boy's bright, hopeful eyes. "You can be better." Tommy grinned. "Promise?" Keanu nodded. "Promise." Then, with one last look at the thriving market, Keanu Reeves walked into the night. Another fight won. Another town saved. Another story told. The grand opening of the new farmers market had arrived, and the once abandoned Easy Save lot had transformed into something unrecognizable. Where there had once been a corrupt grocery store built on deception, now stood rows of vibrant stalls, each one brimming with fresh produce, homemade goods, and the sound of a community rebuilding itself. The air smelled of baked bread, ripe fruit, and warm spices, a stark contrast to the stale, overpriced shelves that once stood in the same spot. The sun cast golden hues over the bustling marketplace, illuminating the smiling faces of families and vendors alike. Keanu Reeves stood quietly in the crowd, dressed casually in a dark jacket and jeans, hands in his pockets as he observed everything unfold. He wasn't here for recognition. He didn't need applause. He was simply here to see the difference. And what he saw? A neighborhood that had found its heartbeat again. Near the center of the market, Sarah Morgan stood behind a small booth, her hands dusted with flour as she arranged fresh loaves of bread onto wooden trays. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. No longer the tired, overworked single mother struggling at checkout lines. Now, she was a business owner, standing proud, her children beside her. Mia and Tommy giggled as they helped, passing out small samples to customers. Tommy, eager as ever, held up a basket of warm rolls. "Fresh bread, the best in town," he announced with the confidence of a seasoned salesman. An elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, approached and took a piece. She bit into it, closing her eyes with appreciation. "Oh, honey," she said, grinning. "This tastes like home." Sarah's chest swelled with pride. This was what she had been fighting for. A few stalls away, journalist Emma Lan stood with a cameraman, recording live coverage of the grand opening. She wore a warm but professional smile, speaking into the microphone as she addressed the audience tuning in. "This market is more than just fresh food," she said. "It's a symbol of resilience, of a community reclaiming its future." He turned, motioning toward Sarah. And at the heart of it all, Sarah Morgan, a mother who, despite being pushed to the edge, stood up against injustice and helped bring down a criminal scheme that had plagued this community for years. Sarah glanced up, caught off guard as Emma approached with the microphone. "Sarah, can we have a word?" Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, laughing lightly. "Of course." Emma smiled. The world saw what happened at Easy Save, and now they're seeing this, a thriving market, a fresh start. How does it feel? Sarah glanced around at the people laughing, trading, building something real. "It feels incredible," she said, voice thick with emotion. "When all of this started, I thought I was alone. I thought there was nothing I could do. But I was wrong." Emma nodded. "And what would you say to others who might be in your position, who feel trapped like you once did?" Sarah looked into the camera, her expression turning serious. I'd tell them that even when it feels impossible, even when the world tries to make you feel small, you are not powerless. She exhaled, shaking her head. I used to believe people like Porter would always win, that people like me just had to accept it. But now, I know one voice can make a difference. Em's smile grew. A lot of people see you as a hero, Sarah chuckled. I'm no hero, I just refuse to be afraid. Her eyes scanned the crowd until she spotted him. Keanu. Keanu had remained on the sidelines, watching with quiet pride. But when Sarah's gaze locked onto his, her expression softened. She excused herself from Emma and quickly made her way toward him, Mia and Tommy following close behind. Keanu didn't move. He simply waited, his signature calm presence unwavering. When Sarah finally reached him, she didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at the man who had changed everything. Then, in a voice filled with gratitude, she finally spoke. You changed everything for us. Keanu shook his head slowly, a small smile touching his lips. Your strength did that. Sarah let out a breath, laughing softly. You always do that, don't you? Keanu raised an eyebrow. Do what? Give other people the credit. Keanu smirked. Because they deserve it. She shook her head in disbelief, but there was admiration in her eyes. Thank you, she said again, this time with more weight behind it. Keanu simply nodded. Anytime. And then, Mia and Tommy stepped forward. Tommy tugged at Keanu's sleeve, his wide eyes filled with something bigger than admiration, something like awe. Mr. Reeves, he said, are you a superhero? Keanu chuckled. What makes you say that? Tommy furrowed his brow, as if the answer should have been obvious. You fight bad guys. You save people. Keanu crouched down, meeting Tommy's gaze at eye level. You know what real superheroes do? He asked. Tommy shook his head. They don't fight for themselves, they fight for others. Tommy grinned. Like you? Keanu smiled. Like you. Tommy's eyes went wide with wonder. Mia, quieter but just as curious, whispered, Are you staying? Keanu glanced around, at the bustling market, at the families thriving, at a community that no longer needed saving. Then he shook his head. Not this time. Mia's expression fell just slightly. Why not? Keanu ruffled her hair gently. Because you've got this now. Sarah nodded in understanding, smiling through misty eyes. And with that, Keanu stepped back. Sarah watched him, something inside her knowing this was goodbye. Not forever, but for now. As the sun began to set, golden light stretched across the market, casting long shadows over the pavement. Keanu took one last look at the town he had helped rebuild. A place that was once filled with fear and corruption, now filled with hope. Then, with his hands tucked into his pockets, he turned and walked away. He didn't need a grand exit. He didn't need a speech. He had done what he came to do. And now, it was time to move on. Because somewhere out there, another story was waiting to be written. Another fight. Another person in need. Another life about to be changed. And Keanu Reeves? He would be there. As the sun set over the newly thriving farmers market, the last traces of Easy Save Grocery were nothing more than a distant memory. The store that once represented corruption, greed, and exploitation had been replaced with something pure, something real. Community. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of it all, watching the families laugh, shop, and rebuild their lives. He had seen injustice too many times to count, but this time it hadn't taken a fist fight or a grand battle to set things right. It had started with one small moment. A checkout line, a single mother, a choice, one act of kindness, and that one act had changed everything. As Keanu walked toward his motorcycle, his mind drifted back to the first moment in the grocery store. He hadn't known who Sarah Morgan was. He hadn't known how deep Porter's corruption ran. All he had seen was a mother struggling to pay for her groceries. A mother who had been humiliated, exploited, pushed to the edge. And he had made a choice. He had stepped forward. Not because it was easy, not because it was his problem, but because it was the right thing to do. And that choice had uncovered so much more. Keanu had seen this kind of thing before. People turned a blind eye to corruption every day. Maybe they were scared, maybe they felt powerless. But what they didn't realize was that corruption doesn't survive because of power. It survives because of silence. And all it takes is one voice to break that silence. Keanu thought about Sarah, about Mrs. Henderson, Detective Marcus Cole, and Emma Lan. None of them had started this journey expecting to become heroes. But when the truth had stared them in the face, they hadn't looked away. They had stood up. And because of them, an entire neighborhood had been saved. People like to think of courage as something grand, something explosive. They imagined heroes in battle, standing tall against impossible odds. But real courage? It wasn't about throwing punches. It wasn't about winning fights. It was about standing up, especially when no one else would. Keanu thought about Sarah, staring Porter in the eye, refusing to let him win. About Mrs. Henderson, stepping forward in front of an entire store, revealing the truth of her eviction. They hadn't worn capes. They hadn't been trained warriors. They had just refused to let fear silence them. That was real courage. And that was what had saved this town. As Keanu pulled on his helmet, he took one last look at the farmer's market, now bustling with life. This was how change started. Not with one man trying to fix everything, but with people coming together. People refusing to accept corruption. People choosing to do what was right, no matter the cost. Keanu knew the world needed more of that. More people willing to pay attention. More people willing to speak up. More people willing to be the change. Because injustice only thrives when good people stay silent. And all it takes is one voice to shatter that silence. As Keanu revved his engine, he thought about the people watching this story unfold. Maybe some of them had seen injustices in their own lives. Maybe they had watched someone get mistreated and didn't know what to do. Or maybe they had been the ones who needed help. To them, Keanu had one final message. The world doesn't change on its own. It changes because of people. People like Sarah. People like Mrs. Henderson. People like you. Because kindness isn't just an emotion. It's an action. Courage isn't just a word. It's a choice. So pay attention. Speak up. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice to stop something wrong. Keanu smiled one last time, then rode off into the fading sunset. Another town changed. Another battle won. Another life rebuilt. And just like that, he was gone.